From Caracas, I'm Cody Weddle. Today we're in Parque del Este here in Caracas, Venezuela, and we're joined by George Zade. He is an author of the book Palestine and Disinformation, and he's also an investigator. It was on January 7th that two gunmen stormed the offices of the Charlie Hebdo satirical magazine in Paris, France. They killed 12 people. The event sparked worldwide attention and the largest demonstrations in Paris since World War II. And today with Mr. Zade, we're going to analyze those events, the reaction around the world, and also international media coverage. Mr. Zade, thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Whenever we see an attack like this that involves Islam and Muslims, it seems that international media focuses on their religion very closely, and we don't necessarily see that with other attacks and events in the world. Would you agree with that?
Maybe this is an issue that is linked with previous actions. We have to remember that in the West Hemisphere, there is a theory stating that we are now facing a clash of civilizations. Those media outlets that focus on religion are part of this clash of civilizations. They create matrix of opinion, they establish stereotypes that then justify further military aggressions and wars, because the military industry have to continue working, manufacturing arms and guns. That is why those countries continue talking about certain groups and religions in a particular fashion. Actually, we always talk about print media or audiovisual media. However, sometimes we forget about movies, such as Hollywood. Hollywood is one of the world's main industries that promotes stereotypes. For example, when I was young, in the 60s, there were a lot of cowboy movies. In those movies, there was always a Mexican man who was depicted as a bad guy, and Mexican women were always depicted as girls who suffered and who were always persecuted and harassed, and it was always the Americans who ended up rescuing her. Then there was the time when Colombians, whenever you see a Colombian guy, he was identified as a drug trafficker. Now there are the Muslims. Every time you see a Muslim in a movie, he is a terrorist. Those are cliches, the stereotypes that Hollywood has established. Then the media applies the same strategy, and the news is presented based on those on that alleged class of civilizations. And that's the difference between the new movement that has started to emerge in Latin America and some other countries. Because we don't talk about clash of civilizations, but unity of civilizations. That's the difference between Latin America and that Western theory. With regards to Islam, any person who knows what Islam is, I'm not an expert, but whoever that knows what Islam is, that person can notice that Islamism neither promotes nor condones violence, violence that is promoted by the so-called Islamic State, Daesh, and the Al-Nusra Front. Whether it is the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, Islamism promotes peace. We can see that in Spain, when the Arabs lived there, they were not forced to convert to Islam. And that's why the entire Latin American is Christian and not Muslim. Then you can see how tolerant Islam is. Because if we are to judge Judaism, for example, from a Zionist viewpoint, we will say that Judaism is racist and all of that. And if we are to judge Christians according to the point of view of the Christian extremists, those that promote their religions based on skin color, or those involved in the crusade, or those who defend the Aryan race, or the neo-Nazi people, all of them are white and Christian people, then we would say that Jesus Christ came to this world in order to do nothing. That is why we have to be careful. That is why we need media outlets that really uphold these human values, as opposed to those who don't have any values. That's why we have to be more humane. We don't have to treat human beings as objects, because human beings are treated as objects in this world that is more about materialism, and this, as Pope John Paul put it, savage capitalism.
And so, do you worry about after an event like this in Paris and other events we've seen in the past, do you worry about a rise in Islamophobia? Have we seen that in the past, and are we already seeing that in this case, in your opinion?
Islamophobia has been shaped a long time ago. In 1975, a war erupted in Lebanon. It was allegedly between Christians and Muslims. All of that was false. All of that was part of a plan that was set by the Zionist movement since 1948, a plan that was set by David Ben-Gurion, who said that the region had to be divided into small theocratic states. They started with Lebanon because it was the weakest among the Arab countries. That was a civil war that took place in Lebanon in 1975. It took 15 years and they did nothing. They just destroyed the country, and they wanted to create the small theocratic state. We can see the same in Iraq. They have tried to divide it. They did the same in Sudan, and that's why we have to. They created those phobias, not only against Islamism. That's temporary. They also, because all that far-right groups that actually are not related to Islam at all, the Taliban were welcomed in the White House by Ronald Reagan. They were welcomed as freedom fighters. It was Ronald Reagan who welcomed them. Well, then they considered them to be the bad guy. And then Hillary Clinton's Secretary of State recognized that in the United States Senate committee. You can look for that on YouTube. You can watch the videos. She recognized that they created the Taliban movement. The same with Al Qaeda. All that movement that talk about religions and mainly in the Middle East were created by the United States in order to favor Israeli interests.
And have we seen that reflected in news coverage? The roots of these groups and the roots of these extremist groups, in your opinion?
All of them have the same roots. All of them have the same roots. The Islamist movement have the same roots as the Zionist movement, because all of them were created by the same people. The Zionist movement, which intends to establish a Jewish nation, have created something which they called Israel. They need to justify the creation of this state. They have to create an environment in which a region is seen through the eyes of religion. That is where all of these so-called Islamist movements come from. And of course it serves from other interests and objectives within the strategy of fight against Russia and China. I'm talking about Western Hemisphere, and it is time to generate conflict. If we cannot generate conflict by means of religion, then they generate conflict based on ethnicity, but they have to divide the region and to create or generate conflict so as to justify and to keep the security of Israel. The roots of all of the groups come from the same house, the White House. There's no doubt about it. Same Bin Laden in 2001, in June 2001, 2 months before the 9/11 attacks, he was at a hospital. And then the CIA director for the region visited him. He visited him because of kidney problems.
But the average U.S. citizen, I don't think realizes that. Or do you think so?
Regrettably, American citizens are misinformed. That's the danger of the media, because with mass psychology, they use fragile aspects of the human being. Some of them is religion, to promote hatred and doubt and things that are not related. There's an Arab expression which says, religion is for God and the homeland is for all. And this saying is not valued anymore in the Arab world because of the media, which promote hatred from one religion against another religion. But not only that, between the same religion, there's division, and they have promoted that division. That's the way the common citizen, in a several opportunity, let's say, they are intoxicated with the ideas they are continuously presented by the media. Most of them, mainly the TV. Then you saw that in the Lebanon civil war and now in Syria, and they woke up and they are not intoxicated anymore, and they reasoned and realized that they had done wrong. In Lebanon, they cried when two groups, a Muslim group and a Christian Muslim, met before the war ended. They met and then they cried when they met, and they started to remember the good times where there was peaceful coexistence. And now in Syria we can see repression. In those villages where the United States, the West Hemisphere, the NATO, Canada, Australia, they're all far from those villages, and there is integration there. There's unity there in those regions. Those Islamist fanatics are now part of the Syrian society, which is a tolerant society. So yes, it is possible. We should fight for it. So as the media continues with their unhealthy ideas, we can continue to promote the true idea of what the human beings is, because we have to become more humane and stay away of those effects and hatred that are in place because of the media. And we have seen that in different parts of the world.
And Mr. Sane, what do you think of this magazine? It has this reputation of being anti-religious. Supposedly it was a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad that originally sparked all of this. What do you think? Do you find it offensive? What do you think of this publication?
Well, we have to take into consideration that the religious sentiment is a sensitive issue. A person, a believer, whatever, either you believe in Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, it doesn't matter. If that person have a relation with something which is extra human nature, a superior being, and within these ideas, we cannot have a human being that insults those beliefs. That's a sensitive issue, and people may react in different ways. Actually, a person with an atheist person is not entitled to insult the belief of another person. And even more, in this case, for example, this weekly magazine, it have it had published against Islam and the Prophet. There's a person who said, an expert French person, who said, liberty to insult is an insult to liberty. And under that criterion, we can say that in reality, they are insulting themselves, those who promote freedom of speech, because freedom of speech also has to be limited. Freedom of speech cannot turn into debauchery. We have to respect each other. If we don't do that, we are not in a human society, and we are turned to savage animals.
And that's really the two big discussions that have been sparked because of this: freedom of religion, freedom of speech. How do we balance those?
Freedom of religion and freedom of speech can go hand by hand. Freedom of speech doesn't mean to prevent a person from speaking. For example, if you're going to talk about France, there is a particular case because how can I insult Islam and say that is freedom of speech while I can even investigate what happened with the Holocaust because it is considered to be anti-Semitic, and there are laws that imprison you if you try to investigate and to find out the truth. So there is a double standard, a duality that offends society. It is the fact that some people are allowed to insult while others are not.
And what about the most recent edition of this newspaper magazine following these attacks? They've come out with their first edition. Once again, with that caricature of the Prophet Muhammad on the front page. I think normally they sell up to 50,000 copies. It looks like this time they're going to sell out. They're going to sell millions. And again, with that cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad on the front page. So doubling down on their editorial policy there. What do you make of that?
Yes, that is related to mass psychology, let's say, that the median, in this case, this newspaper, forgot about the victims of the terrorist attack in order to think about a common objective, which is commerce. They wanted to sell their newspaper. It is about making people react and believe the ideas they defend. So, before this article was published, they were already promoting this article, and other media outlets were promoting this article. And they wanted to see whether this newspaper published this article or not. And there were some activists who were concerned about that, and they advised them not to do that. But they did. They wanted to do that because they wanted to show that they defended freedom of speech, even though they insulted other people. What was important for them was freedom of speech. And you always wonder, freedom of speech, but how much? At what price? So other people have no rights? Is that so? That's the issue, that's the debate, whether some people have rights or not, if they are entitled to be respected or not. If they are not, well, they're right, they can insult whatever they want, but if a person isn't, which is entitled to be respected, is he entitled to insult another person? No, he's not. So then there's a group that uses violence to respond, while the other sector causes that violence but using a pencil, something which is not less harmful for society. So in this case, the media, you see, in international media, Western media outlets that distort reality. We have different Western media outlets that distort reality, and they publish what they want and they don't publish what they don't want, such as the case, for example, in US, in Canada, where in an interview they say any news or report or image that can be against Israel, they won't publish it. That's an example of freedom of speech, that freedom of speech that they promote. So we have to treat two things alike. We have to set the standards and say you can do that or not, because on the contrary, we're going to have serious cases more related to those extremists. And so we're going to have some other extremists in other parts of the world. So when you attack the others, what are you going to say? Because in Israel, TV, you saw Virgin Mary, which is sacred for Christians, and they pictured her as a prostitute who was having sex with a team, a football team, and that was humorous. So, what did Christians say? Why the so-called Western civilization didn't do anything? So, when it's about to insult a Muslim or Jewish prophet, they all react. What's the problem? So, why the double standards? Why the double standards Western hemisphere has? That we have to fight against that, and we have to be clear. People cannot be manipulated by the media as they were manipulated in order to buy thousands of papers.
This story received widespread attention around the world. It remained the top story for weeks. At the same time, there was another attack in Nigeria, left hundreds, if not thousands, dead. The exact figure isn't certain. Received little attention. I'm not even sure your average viewer, television viewer, newspaper reader even knows that that event happened. From your experience, is that typical, this overemphasizing, overvaluing of Western cultures, Western countries?
Yes, that is related to the history of the media because of the political interest, whether it is within the country or internationally. We have seen that. It has always been based on the political interest. The thing is that nowadays, thanks to internet and the way the media are dealing with the news, because some media outlets are using the news because of their own interest. Well, we have some news that have been spread the more, and some have been spread less, such as the case in Nigeria, because they may have these news within few seconds, but they don't take this kind of information into account that much, because France is more important than Nigeria according to the Western Hemisphere. Of course, Nigeria is important because of their oil. As long as we are exploiting the Nigerian people, it doesn't matter. Nigeria can remain the same. They need those movements because everything is between the need of creating a picture of Muslim terrorists. That's within the clash of civilizations. Now, the United States supports those conflicts in Africa. Maybe one country or several countries at the same time. So if you look at the history, there's always been conflict in Africa, and that's within the framework of this Western hegemony in the world. We have to remember the United States says they are entitled to govern the world. And within this framework, they still believe that. And they think God sent the United States to domain the world. So that is why we have to have a change in the policies in the United States, Europe and Canada, the United States and Europe, because we have to have a policy that aims at participation. People have to participate. We cannot talk about one country domaining the world. Europe cannot remain without a Western policy. And if a prime minister, for example, as we already saw, a prime minister who says, I'm worried about the cultural invasion of the United States, we don't have to take the United States out of the game. We have to have diversity and to accept each other and to be tolerant. That's the only way So the media can't show the reality of the world, a more humane reality of the human being, and not to distort the information. So that's why we have to teach a lesson Hollywood, so they stop to, so they don't produce those kind of movies with a violent man and even a defense of violence or the drugs, even defending sex. All of that comes from Hollywood and from TV. We have to inform, the media have to inform, and not to show a different reality, because sooner or later they will have that kind of reaction as we saw that in France.
So what do you think of projects like Telesur English, like other projects that have been sparked around the world to try to show the world from a global South perspective?
Well, and TV news outlets such as Telesur is important not only for Latin America, even though you say your news are from the South, it is a media that is necessary for every language and other parts of the world, because it shows the Latin American reality, but it also aims at joining the world together, and that's what we need. So if we want to participate and to talk to the other, we have to get to know each other. So what a better way? We have Telesur who does that. So that's very important. We have an inverted pyramid because we think or we believe in the people. And 3 years ago, we have another media outlet in Lebanon who also aims at doing the same. So we have in the world a reality in which there are media outlets that are fighting for this humanity that we need, which the humanity that which is more humane. That's why we have hope. If we have this kind of media outlets, and if we do what we have to do, we can now build a new world that will be an integrated
Thank
world.
you so much, Mr. Zade, for your analysis and joining us. And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again next week for another edition of From Caracas.